The heart bleeds ink. This was a quote I once heard David say, one that I believe will have more meaning for you before we conclude this message. I started this recording from the top of a mountain near the spot I had my first flight experience with David. That was the spot David taught me how to ground launch his base rig. Well, 3 attempts later, I finally got airborne and soon successfully landed in the valley down below, with the only casualty being a giant rip in my pants butt region. That seemed to be a fitting spot to speak with you about my brother David and his life. But nature had something else to say. A hail and lightning storm blew in mid-recording, and with lightning striking all around us, my wife joked how funny the conversation would be with David if we die of lightning strike on this mountaintop. So we aborted mission, and now I'm back in the valley, safely sheltered from the lightning. So who was David? Who really was David? Well, I have a few stories to share with you that might reveal the David you knew and loved, and a few more, on the edge of too personal, that might reveal sides to David you didn't know, as well as share with you some of the life lessons David taught me before he left. For most of David's life, there was a Pacific or an Atlantic Ocean between us, and as a result, the relationship was mostly long distance. We would chat over the phone, but it wasn't until he made the bold move to sell everything and travel the world that we were to meet again in person. David came to stay with my wife and I during his world travels. Upon arriving, immediately he made his presence known. Before David arrived, my desk was a mess of cords and technology strewn all over the place. Well, shortly after his arrival, I get up and I go to my desk. Someone had made a few changes. No longer was it a mess of cords. No longer was it a whirlwind of technology strewn all over the place. Nope, it was neatly organized. David had organized all the cords into nice, neat, zip-tied groups and had velcroed the hard drives to the underside of the desk, out of sight and out of the way. This would be the start of one of many velcro and zip tie optimizations the household would experience at the hand of David. He commented once that a friend told him, "Your life is held together with zip ties, velcro, and duct tape." I can personally attest to this. David was always looking to streamline and optimize. He was never satisfied. I think that was one of the secrets to his success. Shortly after his arrival, my monitor burns out. Now, I live in a country you can't just go to the store and pick up a monitor like this one. It's quite a process to get any late model technology here. David jumps in. "Let me have a look at it," he says. Now, I didn't have much to lose. It was dead as a doornail. Seemed nothing would revive it. "Go ahead," I tell him. Next thing I know, he's got the monitor torn apart all over the table. I'm thinking to myself, well, if it wasn't broke before, it sure is now. David is carefully examining each circuit board as I sit back and watch the show. Finally, he says, "I found it. I found the problem." "Do you have any solder?" he asks. Now, we don't have Radio Shacks here. You can't just pick up solder at any old place. It's always an adventure to get supplies like that. I tell him, "Nope." "Do you have any broken appliances?" he asks. Turns out we had a blender that just burned out. He rips apart the blender and from it harvests the wires and the solder he needs. Next thing I know, the monitor is up and working. It's still the monitor I use to this very day. How did he pull a repair like that out of thin air? I don't know. Challenge puzzle, he would call it. He saw things like this as a challenge to stretch his resourcefulness, to solve problems in creative ways with limited resources. Another secret to David's success, he enjoyed challenge. and stretched himself to solve problems with whatever resources he had. David wasn't planning to stay with us as long as he did, but an opportunity presented itself. He had a chance to leverage his travel contingency capital toward a much bigger life vision he'd been working toward. He sacrificed his travel contingency capital to seize this opportunity and was betting on an asset buyer to make good on payments owed him to continue funding his ongoing travels. When those payments didn't materialize again and again, he found himself forced to make alternate plans, staying longer than he had anticipated. But David is not one to be content sitting still. After a few days stuck in one place, he's getting stir crazy. There were no places to jump, no mountains close by, no opportunities for activities that feed his soul. One morning, I find him messing with some wire. He found some cables and stripped wire out of them and was winding it on a jig he'd made. I ask him, "What are you doing?" "You'll see," he says. Next thing I know, he's wound this star-shaped coil. Now, I'd once shown him a coil based on sacred geometry math. He took that picture and reverse engineered it from the picture and description alone, and he made a prototype. He scavenged some parts to put together a makeshift amp and started pumping power through it. We started experimenting with this coil to see what it could do. So picture this scene. We have this coil in a bowl. We find this unfortunate test specimen, a spider. We start testing different frequencies to see what would happen to the spider. David has a magnet in one hand, and I'm adjusting the frequencies the coil is pumping. As David is waving this magnet over the coil to test its field size, the spider disappears. I kid you not. Poof, the spider's gone. Now, we'd heard of things like this happening with these kinds of coils, but we didn't believe it until it happened right in front of us. Of course, this got David's mind racing. Next thing I know, he's winding another coil, only this time bigger, with more ohm load. Then another coil, yet bigger. Then a 3-layer coil. Then yet another coil with 3 strands instead of 1, so we can test counterspinning the fields against each other. We start testing the capabilities of these coils and discover that, among other things, they can dramatically enhance sleep quality. Sleeping in the field these coils made gives the deepest sleep of your life. But he wasn't done yet. He started improving the amplification and frequency generation. Soon he's put together amplification potential with more power, in his words, than they had at the Woodstock Music Festival. But he wasn't done yet. One day, David arrives at the house with a 5x5 metal sheet. "What is this for?" I ask. "You'll see," he says. Turns out he was gearing up to make the world's largest coil of its type. That metal sheet was the backplate for that coil. Unfortunately, that coil wasn't finished before he left Switzerland. David, if you're listening, that coil is way beyond the point of no return. It needs to be finished. Now, mind you, in this country, he couldn't just buy the parts he needed to make the coils at Radio Shack. He had to scavenge everything from old tech he got at the secondhand market. One day I went down with him to the maze that is the secondhand market. Every dealer there knew him on a first-name basis, and despite the language barrier, they greeted him with respect and esteem. Now, respect and esteem like that from these hardened dealers isn't easy to establish as a foreigner in this country, yet he was able to bridge that gap. That was David. He wasn't content to sit still, and he wasn't content to let the challenges of getting the supplies he needed stop him. He was always moving forward and making best use of his time despite the constraints. Now, he's been working on these coils for a while, and he's taken them pretty far, much further than I think anyone had taken them, but he's been cooped up inside too long. He wanted to get out and do some adventuring, only we didn't have a car to go to the places he wanted to. "Why don't you get a car?" he asks. I say, any car we buy times its cost by 100, because that's the opportunity cost you'll pay. Every spare dime we had was being invested into a high leverage project we were working on. My wife overhears this. She's tired of taking taxis, and she's tired of public transport. They both gang up on me to convince me to get a car. Well, I give David an impossible budget. I tell him, if you can find a car that won't break down for $1,200 or less, we can get a car. David goes right to work, making calls, making public transport runs into the city. Next thing I know, he's pulling into the driveway with an all-wheel drive Toyota in sound working condition. David proudly announces, I got it under budget. That car has been a trooper and has never broke down on us once to this very day. He knows cars. He knew what to get and what not to. But he wasn't satisfied. I walk into the garage. He has the wheels off and is cutting up some rubber. I ask him, what are you doing? You'll see, he says. Turns out he was making a makeshift lift kit out of that rubber, and he used it to lift that little all-wheel drive a good 3 inches, turning that car into a very capable off-roader. And doing that led to a host of adventures we would have never had otherwise. That was David. He was never satisfied. He was always making things better and always keen to use his talents to enrich the lives of those around him. With my wife gone to Turkey and me hard at work on a project, David has some downtime. I tell him to take the car and go scout some peaks to jump. He's happy to oblige. He loads the car up with gear, and he plans to spend a week or two camping and exploring the peaks in the country. Well, days later I get a call from him. He proceeds to tell me the highlights of his adventure. But I wouldn't get the full story until he gets back home. Turns out he was headed for a peak he'd scouted, but on the way he was stopped by men with guns, angry men with guns. They were interrogating him. Why was he there? What was he doing? Who sent him? Unbeknownst to him, he had trespassed on sacred ground. Despite the language barrier, David was able to convey to them he was just looking to base jump off that peak. Now, this must have been quite an anomaly for these guards to see. Base jumping is not well known in this country. Once they realized what he was up to, they thought he was crazy, but immediately they became allies in his cause. They took him to the nearby village to meet some of the elders of the village. I don't know if it was to get permission to jump or something else. Now, between that time and the time he left that village, I don't know exactly what happened. But here's a few highlights. Somewhere, somehow, David ends up teaching the village boys how to walk on their hands and do backflips. That turned into arm wrestling competitions, which leads to wrestling competitions. Seems he ends up wrestling each of the men in the village when, one after another, they kept getting pinned. David ended up being given special permission and did a base jump off the peak the country considers sacred. Next thing he knows, he's being invited for a glass of Georgia's finest wine with the mayor of the region. While he went up there with the intention to camp and enjoy the solitude in the woods, the village was having none of that. The village adopted him, and they wouldn't let him camp, nor eat alone. They were eager to feed and house him, and despite his best efforts to avoid alcohol, they always had a glass of wine for him, begging him to drink with them. He tells them he can't drink that much. That leads to him teaching the boys why they should be careful with alcohol, that too much will get in the way of their goals. That leads to him teaching them that it's important that they have goals and visions for their life. He tells them that they have to come up with a vision for their life before he goes. When he's gearing up to leave that little village, they wouldn't let him leave until he promises them he'll come back. Upon leaving, one of the boys in the village comes up to him and wanted to say something, but he's too shy. Now, David had taught this boy acupuncture points to hold that would balance his nervous system if ever he was feeling too shy. The boy starts to say something, but he can't get the words out. He pauses, and he holds these acupuncture points for a moment, and then he starts to speak. He tells him he doesn't know exactly his life vision yet, but whatever it is, he wants to be like David Wall. That was David. Despite the language barrier, despite being a foreigner, despite trespassing on sacred ground, he was able to bridge the gap and inspire these boys in that village to live with vision and purpose. A similar story happened at the Ulidenis Air Games. David had been invited to the Air Games when the organizer saw his flying skills displayed on social media. This provided an opportunity for him to get current with some of the skills he needed for a much bigger project he was planning. He jumped at the opportunity. He finds himself in a village in Turkey near the peak that provided him the terrain he needed to train. But he had a saboteur in the town. Turns out there was another wingsuit pilot in that area that was jealous of David and threatened by his flying skills. Because the cops trusted this pilot, he had the power to dictate if it was safe for other jumpers to jump. This saboteur abused that power and used the cops to stop David from jumping. But that didn't stop David. Now, I don't know exactly what happened between those first encounters with the cops, but David later sends me a picture. It was him having lunch with the cops. Somewhere, somehow, he'd won over the cops and turned them into allies. How, I do not know. But the story doesn't end there. David calls my wife one day out of the blue. There was a reporter next to him that wanted an interview. My wife was translating the Turkish to English back and forth between the reporter and David. From this reporter, we find out David was quite the phenomenon in his town. While other jumpers could get 1, maybe 2 jumps in a day, David was like a machine, able to hike and jump multiple times a day like they'd never seen. When he was gearing up to jump, unbeknownst to him, the town would announce over the loudspeakers. The town would come out and watch him in awe. This reporter was trying to get the story. How was he able to do that? Where did this stamina come from? Before he left, he'd won over the cops, he'd inspired the townspeople, and eventually even the saboteur too becomes his ally. That was David. He would meet people where they were at. He would navigate the social situation and leave a mark, inspiring those he touched. It seemed as hard as David tried to lay low, it never happened. Winter was upon us, but the snow conditions were terrible in the ski town we lived in. David had left for a few days to take his girls snowboarding at another resort and maybe get some base jumps in. A day or two later, I get a call from him. He tells me he's in a spa, in a bathrobe. Now, if you know David, he doesn't do spas, and he certainly doesn't do bathrobes. I didn't get the full story until he gets back home. Turns out while he went up there to have a nice, relaxing weekend snowboarding with his girl, that didn't happen. Instead, that town had remembered him from his prior visit. He ends up getting recruited to shoot a multi-part commercial. He didn't even bring his razor, let alone come prepared to shoot a commercial. That was David. He couldn't live small even if he tried. We moved to this ski town with the intention to lay low and enjoy the snowboarding. Instead, David finds himself with dignitaries helping them solve the town's water problem. David heads to another resort town to scout a potential jump. Now, this town had seen a record dry season. The people were suffering from lack of tourism, and they were scared about what the future might bring. While in town, David speaks to one person offhandedly about how to solve the problem. That person speaks to another, who speaks to another. Next thing he knows, he's giving a presentation on how to expand the tourist season by catering to extreme sports athletes. That was David. Wherever he went, as hard as he tried not to, he couldn't live small. He was always trying to use his skills and talents to create more life for those around him. Now, for those of you that aren't familiar with his story, David escaped the oppressive cult he was raised in around the age of 15. That story is way too long to tell here, but to briefly summarize, with only seconds to decide and only $22 in his pocket, he jumps out a second-story window to freedom, into a world he knew very little about. But despite growing up in a cult with limited social skills, limited education, no friends, no resources, he was able to build a business empire just a few short years later. That enabled him to pursue and eventually excel in the sports he was forbidden from in that cult. He became a multidisciplinary athlete, excelling in snowboarding, motorcycles, quad racing, rally car racing, and eventually his true love, wingsuit base jumping. And he did it all well before most his age were still trying to figure out what to major in college. How was David able to achieve so much so fast in so varied of fields, despite the setbacks and the incredible challenges coming from that cult presented? Well, David and I would speak in depth about life and all its aspects during his stay. During those talks, some of his philosophies of life came through. Here's a few I believe powered his success. Some you might be able to take with you and apply to your own life. David would tell you everything meaningful he achieved was spawned from true courage. True courage, what David would call doing courage. What did that mean to him? Here's what it didn't mean. It didn't mean hubris. It didn't mean being reckless or taking unnecessary risks. Doing courage to David meant doing the right thing in spite of fear. If it was the right thing to do, David would do it. He wouldn't let fear stop him. He knew every time he practiced courage, regardless of the outcome, he would gain more freedom, more ability, more esteem for himself. And regardless of what happened, he would learn something. He knew doing true courage was never a losing choice. Think about the most cherished things in your life right now. Didn't they all come from a disciplined effort that was spawned by a single act of courage? David knew this viscerally. He could not stand to go to bed at night knowing he cowered to fear that day. David knew courage was the price the universe demanded of him to open the door. But he knew that was just the beginning. He had to keep making steps forward to achieve anything meaningful. With every worthy endeavor, David knew there would be obstacles. The inner strength to overcome obstacles, David would call grit. Grit to David was the unshakable faith that he can overcome the obstacle, combined with the iron will to keep trying until he found a way. Grit to David could be summarized in the ability to get knocked down hard, to get up, to dust himself off, to learn from the setback, to readjust with new knowledge, and re-engage with the same zeal he had before he was knocked down. He had a driving belief that if he did his part, making the very best use of every resource he had and continuing to take the next step forward, so long as he did that, then the universe would step in and make up the difference. That belief was what pushed him to overcome obstacles that stopped so many others just inches from the reward. Courage and grit were among David's keystone practices for which everything meaningful of his life was spawned. He had another governing principle he would use to choose what to apply that grit toward. He called it mastering the point of no return. David learned this concept from hitting massive snowboarding kickers. If he was charging a kicker, there was a point at which there was no going back. He had to fully commit to hitting that kicker, regardless of the outcome on the landing. David applied this to everything in his life. He would dabble in many different things, but as soon as he had crossed the point of no return in any one thing, he would charge like a lion. Regardless of the obstacles life threw at him, he would charge through like a lion, for he knew all the payoff was at the end. If he was going to see the benefit from all the hard work, he had to push through to completion. But there's some subtleties to this principle. Mastering the point of no return meant to first choose wisely the kickers you hit. Dabble in a lot of things. Experience as many things as you can on a surface level. Find that thing that makes your soul sing. And once you've found it, charge forward like a lion. But once you've started to charge that kicker, know if you should abort mission. Perhaps you're not ready to hit that kicker. You need to hone your skills first on smaller kickers. Have the wisdom to know when to abort mission, but have the self-honesty to know you're making that choice from a place of wisdom and not a place of fear. But most importantly, know when you've passed the point of no return. And if you have, fully commit, regardless of your skills, regardless of your resources, fully commit. To abort mission past the point of no return will cost you more, regardless of the outcome, than fully committing. Mastering the point of no return meant gaining the wisdom to first choose the right path, then to know when it's time to charge forward with everything you have, regardless of the skills or resources. For in any endeavor you choose, all the payoff, all the reward is found at the end. Another one of David's habits, he would actively seek out discomfort. In David's words, comfort is a trap inside a narrowing bandwidth. And if you allow it, that bandwidth gets more and more narrow. And unless you break out of that bandwidth regularly, you'll become a little bitch to your comforts. David knew comfort led to hypnotic rhythm. David would avoid hypnotic rhythm like his life depended on it. If ever he found himself in hypnotic rhythm, he would take on another challenge, he would learn a new skill, he'd plan another adventure, he would do something, anything to break out of that hypnotic rhythm a life of comfort often seduces us into. That is what he was doing when he jumped out of that second-story window. That is what he was doing when he stepped into the uncertainty of entrepreneurship. That is what he was doing when he sold everything and started his world travels. And when that got stopped by COVID, that is what he was doing when he took on another challenge, one the scope of which is far too grand to go into here, but one that would impact for the better everyone on the planet. Another key principle David lived by was aligning his daily habits with his goals. David knew every worthy goal required a set of daily habits he would have to follow to realize that goal. David was always very keen to watch his habits. He knew if he couldn't achieve at the level of right daily habits, he'd never achieve the long-term goal. He would say, "Your life is determined on the head of a pin." What seems like the smallest of daily choices can have dramatic effects on your destiny. He knew he had to have those small daily wins. He knew just one habit, like checking social media for just one more minute during his golden production time, could be the difference between a life of meaning and a life of abject failure and regret. He had a deep self-awareness. If ever he found his daily habits were clashing with his long-term goals, he told himself the truth, and he would set about changing those contra habits, no matter what it took to change them. And when his life became the most uncertain, David had his iron rod. The iron rod was a metaphor he learned from the cult. It meant something you could hold on to when all the mists of darkness were trying to throw you off course. For David, his iron rod was, no matter what happened, no matter how chaotic, no matter how uncertain his life became, he would do two things every day. He would get up, he would create value for himself, and he'd create value for those around him. He knew if he did those two things, that would keep him on course. That would keep him away from addictions. That would keep him from falling for the pitfalls that have taken so many down when things get uncertain. In doing that, he made his life rich and the life of all those around him rich. And the last one I'll mention here, David made it a practice to celebrate others' success. He never was threatened by anyone's success. He would say, if you can't take joy in others' successes, you'll never be able to take joy in your own. Now, from the outside, it looked like David's life was all about living large, chasing dreams, enjoying life to the fullest. But he would be the first to tell you, it was about none of that. No, there was a much deeper purpose driving David, one that would not reveal itself fully until he spoke about what base jumping really meant to him. So what did base jumping really mean to David? Well, let me ask you. If you're facing death every day, how might you live differently? If you knew the next moment with the people you love and care about might be your last, wouldn't you bring more presence to that moment? Think about the person you care about the most. If you knew your next conversation with them might be the last, would you lie to them? Would you keep secrets from them? Would you leave anything unsaid, knowing you might never get a chance to say it later? Would you put off stepping toward your worthy dreams for another day? Would you wrong anyone in your business or personal life? Or would you seek out every day to live with full integrity so that night you could pass into sleep with a clear conscience? To David, base jumping was a spiritual practice, one that demanded of him every day that he live with presence, with urgency, and full integrity in all his interactions. David knew something viscerally we all know at some level. We're all going to die, and at the end of our life, there will be two types. One tells himself, I lived a good life. I did what I came to do. I became who I set out to become. I pursued my worthy dreams. In doing so, I made life rich. Rich for myself and rich for those around me. And now I can die complete. The other begs for more time to make things right with those they wronged, time to pursue the dreams they put off, time to cherish the small moments they thought were insignificant. But for them, it's too late. They squandered their time. They squandered their life. And now they'll die full of regrets. David knew the length of your life didn't matter. The depth of your life is what mattered. Base jumping required of him he lived with depth. David wasn't pursuing dreams to pursue dreams. He knew that would end up a hollow finish line. In his words, it was about the art of becoming. Dreams, goals, experiences, those are just the cauldron for which the becoming is forged. And David's greatest becoming wasn't to be realized until just shortly before he died. The heart bleeds ink. That quote had special meaning for David. David's story of becoming could not be complete without sharing why. David's mother used to call him Steady Eddie. That meant she could always count on him. He'd always come through for her and the family. But to honor his search for truth about that cult he was raised in, meant eventually he would be rejected by his mother. The pain of that rejection was just too much for him to face. The deep soul wound from that rejection could be encapsulated by the words I heard him say when he said, I don't have a mother. It was far easier for him to tell himself he didn't have a mother rather than face the pain surrounding his mother. Well, no thought lives in the mind rent-free, no matter how hard we try to forget it. And that pain, that injury surrounding the first female of his life, That started a pattern that would continue in most his female relationships. David approached relationships the same way he approached life. If they were important, he didn't do them halfway. He would dive into the relationship with his whole heart. Despite bringing his whole heart and soul to the relationship, they always seemed to end in betrayal. That betrayal would cut him to the bone. This pattern repeated again while he was staying with me. Now, almost everyone leaving that cult carries a very similar wound, myself included. I had navigated this part of the soul journey years prior. I could recognize what was blind to him. I proceed to tell him, effects can only be changed at cause, and this was only an effect of the deep soul wound that he has yet to face, and that if he was to heal that wound, the only path to doing so would be to bring the truth to the story. No longer can he deny having a mother and still stay in integrity to the truth. I told him, you can achieve everything you dream about. You can do for humanity what you've worked so hard toward. But if you don't heal this one thing, all that will be for nothing. You have to heal this wound surrounding the first female of your life. And if you do that, the next woman that comes into your life will not be the one to gouge your heart open and get you to face what you haven't. Your destiny will change. One of the single most important becomings for you to live a whole and complete life is that you become a whole and complete man. In so doing, attract that whole and complete woman. I proceed to tell him the process I used to heal this wound and how that changed my destiny. And true to form, David listened. He recognized this was a blind spot. He recognized that this was something he had to address. The next day, I find him shopping for a horse. He was looking for a horse to take him to the deep woods, a place where he could find the solitude he needed to get his soul right. The pain around that last relationship betrayal and the search for answers, that started a series of talks he and I were to have. Those talks were driven by the questions. What does it really mean to be a fully integrated, whole and complete man? What must a boy do to shed his boyish ways and become a man? How does a man seated in the true expression of masculinity act in this world? How does he treat other men? How does he treat women? How does he act in the community? What are the common injuries he had to overcome? How did he overcome them? What does a truly divine dance between the masculine and the feminine look like? And if his biological parents were seated in the right expression of masculinity and femininity, how might they have raised him differently? How would those parents have treated him during those defining moments of childhood, those moments that led to such deep soul wounds? And from these questions, he started to get answers. Well, David, true to form, he wasn't content to keep these answers to himself. He was planning a curriculum, a course. The design of this course was to meet these damaged boys where they were at, and through a series of careful steps, would initiate them into true manhood. But he realized the male-female dynamic has been so perverted by the social controllers of this world, it would require a careful unfolding, a careful one step at a time unfolding to bring these damaged boys into a whole and complete expression of manhood. This was something he wasn't given. That was something that would have prevented so much pain if only someone had given it to him earlier. And through these series of talks, he recognized something absolutely critical. He recognized those leaving that cult, the ones that thrived, the ones that didn't fall into addiction or destroy their lives, all had a very similar origin story. That origin story could be summed up by the scene in the movie The Count of Monte Cristo. In that story, the hero was trapped in a prison. He had a chance to break free. But to take that chance required he faced death. He had to be thrown off a cliff into an uncertain world with a very high probability he might die. He realized the boys who had left the cult, who didn't have a safety net, that had no one to help them, it was those that thrived. Then he asked the deep question, how do you take a boy that has been so deeply damaged with untruths, and how do you inculcate in them the character traits, the ethics, the skills, the wisdom that would be required of them to face death but come out on the other side alive? He saw base as a tool for doing that. David realized we live in such a world of comfort and safety, these boys never have to face death, so they don't develop the aspects of high character that would be required of them to face death and survive, nor do they have the urgency to prepare for the day they might face death. David saw base as a powerful metaphor to take a boy who's struggling with boyish demons and take him through a course of preparation that would eventuate into him facing death on the edge of a cliff. And if he goes through the steps necessary to develop the high character traits that would be required of him to be able to jump off that cliff and survive, that would be a defining moment in his life. No longer would he see himself as a boy. He would now see himself as a man. And from that new identity, he would act differently in this world. Think about this. If I bring you to a precipice, you look over the edge, 1,000-foot drop, and I tell you, in a near impossible timeline for you to prepare, you're going to jump off this cliff. And when that time comes, if you jump from a place of hubris, you will die. If you squandered your time to prepare and you jump without the skills, you will die. If you go up to that cliff with the skills, but you let fear stop you, you'll live. But you'll die the 1,000 deaths thereafter, knowing that you let fear beat you. But if you go up to that cliff and you jump from a place of right mind, right skills, right wisdom, you will live. And no longer will you see yourself as a boy. You'll see yourself as a man. And no longer will you have to fight these boyish demons. They'll be slain once and for all. Because the very things that are demanded of you to step into manhood will be demanded of you to step up to that precipice and jump from a place of right skills, right mind, right wisdom. Think about it. What is required of a base jumper to successfully jump? They have to be resourceful. They have to learn how to get the resources to get the training and the equipment. They have to take full responsibility for themselves and responsibility for their training. They have to develop deep emotional mastery. They have to be able to manage their emotions. They have to learn positive politics to navigate that tight-knit base community. They have to have self-honesty. They have to develop the wisdom to know when they should jump and when they shouldn't. All the character traits of high character, the things that make a boy a man, if base training is approached with that mindset, all those character traits can be inculcated in the boy as they train for that jump. David saw base jumping as a powerful tool to end suffering in these boys' lives. David felt deep grief for the boys still imprisoned in that cult and was always thinking how to help them, but not just help them get out and thrive in life. This was one tool he believed could do that. So, what do I believe was David's greatest achievement? To repeat his words, it was in the becoming. And the greatest becoming that I believe he achieved before he died was becoming a more integrated man, healing that damaged relationship with the first female of his life. I believe David would say some of the most precious moments he enjoyed before he died were as a consequence of the dedicated effort he made to healing that broken soul. God is speaking to us through our suffering. And if relationships are causing suffering, there is a message for us, a very loving message for us to hear. For if we listen to what it is teaching us, we can heal that broken soul. And from that whole, complete soul, we can forge the divine relationship we are all meant to have. For it won't matter anything you do in your life. If this aspect is not sorted, you will die an incomplete person. David finally connected with me post-death. After trying everything to establish a communication with David, he finally got through in the dream plane. What was the message for me? Well, he was frustrated. He was frustrated with the egos, with the facades, with all the things that get in the way of connecting with others. He was showing me we can only actualize ourselves through sharing life with others, that a life not shared has little meaning. And that brought to mind a lesson he once had for me, a lesson he learned from the true story told in the movie Into the Wild. In the movie, Christopher John McCandless couldn't stomach the error that our modern society had fallen into. To escape that error, he heads into the deep Alaskan wilderness to be alone with himself, to be alone with God. And from that solitude, he learns an important lesson. His last journal entry before he dies reads, "Happiness is only real when shared." And the only way to truly share happiness is to share it with the person's true self, not their facade. And the only way you can do that is if you too drop your facade. And that brings me to the last defining piece to David's story. David's story could not be complete without sharing with you what might be the most defining life principle he was committed to. A principle that was spawned from a heart in deep, deep pain, bleeding ink onto his journal pages. He called this defining principle the art of the honest self. What did that mean to him? That meant he was committed to living in a truthful state at all times, regardless of the costs or consequences of doing so. The moniker he went by among his close friends meant the search for truth at all costs. He wanted to see himself exactly as he is, with all the flaws, with all the wounds, with all the ugly things he might have been blind to. David would say, "I would rather the uncomfortable truth than the comfortable delusion." He would say, couples who come up against uncomfortable truths and don't face them create a facade. When that facade is finally exposed, the other person is crushed. He could not bear the thought of putting others through that pain. The pain he experienced chiseled in him the will to live in a state of truth, regardless of the cost. Facing the truth requires raw courage. It requires deep self-honesty. It requires iron will, the will to face the truth regardless. And most importantly, and most liberating, it required he abandon once and for all the need for the good opinion of others. David knew in the end, facing the truth always led to freedom. Part of you knows he was onto something. And if you can hear that part of you, I propose an experiment. One I think David would be very aligned with. Consider the idea that the pain in your life is largely caused by untruths you haven't faced. Truths about yourself, truths about the world around you. Try an experiment. Treat this experiment I'm about to propose as a scientific experiment of self-discovery rather than one of self-judgment. Make one small step toward the truth. Face an uncomfortable truth about yourself you've been avoiding. Tell yourself and those affected the truth. Stop the self-judgment. Give yourself the space to face the truth. And stop the judgment of others. Give them the space to face the truth. See if on the other side you don't find more freedom and more peace. And in so doing, your ability to perceive more truth will expand. And from that expanded perspective will come yet more truth. So long as you continue the process, ever so slowly, you will shed one by one the untruths you were blind to. And with each untruth you face, your life will become more and more free. You will find yourself more and more at peace. That is the soul journey. One we are all on. One of going from slavery to freedom. And as hard as some try to avoid it, the truth, facing the truth, is the only path to freedom. David, I can only imagine the zeal for which you are embracing the new arena you find yourself in. I can only imagine the flights you're taking now, unrestricted by this earthly coil. I can only imagine the childlike curiosity spawning the endless questions you're bringing to the new school you find yourself in. David, I wish you well on the next chapter of your soul journey. Charge it like a lion, as I'm sure you will. And if you see Tesla, Victor Schauberger, or Walter Russell, remind them the world is a mess right now, and it needs their inspiration more than ever. Mr. ZTO, we started something. It's way beyond the point of no return. In your moments between what I'm sure is a fully booked schedule, find a way to get some messages through, because it's going to take every bit of inspiration I can get to finish what we started. Well, I'll conclude with the words from one of David's journal entries he shared with me, titled, "A Place to Meet God." From David's journal. God, universe, angels, whatever you choose to call the divine force that governs the laws of nature and this world, this force can protect you from danger. I am living proof of this. And if it were not true, I would not be here to share this with you now. This force can protect you from harm's way, but it cannot protect you from fear. It cannot protect you from cowardice or shrinking from your potential and the calling of your soul toward your dreams. Fear, my friend, and all its forces are your personal challenge. It is, if fear is where the devil might be found, the thing that is keeping you from meeting God. God cannot intervene in this personal challenge. However, if you face fear and all its forces with courage and all the wisdom you have developed to this point, you have opened the door to the meeting place, the place you are one with the divine within and the divine that governs the universe. Here you will meet God. They have a name for this place. They call it flow state. What is possible here is beyond imagination. It is truly magic. What happens here is beyond human capabilities. A place the soul thrives and grows beyond measure. All those who choose to enter this space are affected beyond expression. They can, just as I have, talk around it, but mere words are no adequate capture. To know this space, you must find it yourself. It has been said that in order to activate flow state, there must be inherent danger present. Yes, this is true, that present danger is a means to enter this space, as it provides the perfect environment. However, I believe the essence that is flow state can be found any time we embody courage in face of a worthy challenge. As long as the challenge is in line with the growth of the soul, as long as the challenge is within the advantage of ethics and the flow of the universe. When you face these challenges with courage, you can indeed enter this flow state and become one with the divine within and the divine that governs all. You can indeed meet God in your everyday life. I believe it is in the face of challenge we become. I believe the dreams, that desire, that calling we feel in our hearts toward greater things, this calling is a gift from God to give us a reason to face challenge, the reason to overcome, the reason to grow and become. It is my belief that if you listen to the calling in your heart that asks of you greater things, if you embody courage, sided with ethics and a moral compass, you will inevitably bring anyone face to face with God. You will inevitably become the greatness within. So I challenge you, go and find.